Hey team, let's continue our overview of the animal phyla, now with Phylum Cnidaria. Here we go. Okay, so let's again start off taking a look at our phylogeny because this helps to orient us. It's kind of like a roadmap of where we're going. And if you're really comfortable reading these, then it's pretty easy to kind of figure out, okay, what are the characteristics that make this phyla different from the others? Because those are all mapped out. Many of those are mapped out on this phylogeny right here, right? So remember, here's our root to all of animals. We talked about these sponges last time. Those are the ones that don't have any true tissues. They're asymmetrical, right? But this other branch point, right, this other group that split off from those sponges, we are now going to call everything past this point in our evolutionary tree Eumetazoa. That means, basically, we can translate that as animals with tissues, okay? Then we get another split off right here, this point right here. This major point, we have one group that goes on to be all of the bilateral animals, which is most animals. The other end of our phylogeny down here splits off to become the radially symmetrical animals. That's what radiata means. These groups down here are also diploblastic, meaning that they only have two tissue layers, like we talked about. So we're talking in this video right now about cnidarians, but there's also another phyla in here, the ctenophores. We might do a video with those on those later, but for this video, we're right now just focusing on the cnidarians. So they have true tissue layers. They have two tissues instead of the three up here that we see in the bilateral. So they have two tissue layers, they're diploblastic, and they're radially symmetrical. And that's, evolutionarily speaking, that's kind of what a cnidarian is, right? But let's talk more about what makes this group unique. So Phylum Cnidaria, again, that C is silent. So the cnidarians, these are all aquatic. We do not find any cnidarians living on land. And even though there are some that are freshwater, most of these species are going to be living in marine environments, so in the oceans, in saltwater, usually. Again, they're diploblastic, meaning they have those two tissue layers instead of all three. And so the two embryonic tissue layers that we see in the cnidarians are the endoderm and the ectoderm. So they have an inside layer and they have an outside layer. They're lacking that mesoderm tissue, okay? So we talked about how they're radially symmetrical, so they can be divided up kind of like a pie, right? We also see that they are lacking a full digestive system, meaning that they have what's called a blind gut or gastrovascular cavity. They have one opening. So they kind of eat, push their food in that gastric cavity, and then digest it, and then all kind of comes out the same hole. So it's like a mouse butt, basically. So only one opening to their digestive system. And something that's unique to this group, so each phyla kind of has their own thing going, right? For the cnidarians, one trait that is unique to cnidarians that we only see in this phyla are what we call cnidocytes. So yeah, so the cnidarians are things like jellyfish, corals, anemones, hydras, things like that would be considered a cnidarian. Okay, radially symmetrical, diploblastic, one opening to their digestive tract. All right, let's take a look at what those cnidocytes are. Okay, so a cnidocyte, suffix cyte means cell, and cnido is in reference to cnidarian, right? So these cnidocytes, these cells, have specialized organelles inside of them called nematocysts. So the cyte is the cell, the nematocyst is the specialized organelle that contains basically a harpoon that's under pressure. And these harpoons are sometimes laced with venom or toxic substances, and they can be projected and basically, or injected rather, into their prey, and they're used to grab onto prey, sometimes deliver poison, and then the prey will, die or become paralyzed, which makes it easier for the cnidarian to live, right? So They can be ejected under extreme force and pressure, okay? And they then release, they're barbed, and they can release their venom and they kind of stick into their prey. Okay, so this is a defensive mechanism. This is also a mechanism to help them capture prey, because a lot of these are predatory, trying to hunt and find their food, their dinner, right? And these are touch sensitive, so they basically, in order to inject that nematocyst, they just have to be touched. So the cnidarian can just be sitting there, think like an anemone, just kind of sitting there with its tentacles out, right? Something swims by, brushes up against one of these cnidocytes, and then that triggers the nematocyst. So pretty cool if you're, kind of stuck in one place, or even if you're just a jellyfish kind of floating around. You can't really necessarily see what you're hunting for the most part, right? So if something just swims by, triggers a nematocyst, and you got your dinner. So cnidarians, we typically say they come in two basic forms, and these two forms, the medusa and the polyp, they're basically the same, just one's upside down compared to the other, right? So the medusa stage is typically the motile stage. This would be something like a jellyfish, right? That would be a medusa stage organism. The polyp stage is typically the sessile stage, the stage that is stuck in one spot. And a lot of cnidarians will go through both stages, both the medusa body plan stage and the polyp body plan stage throughout their life. Typically, the polyp stage is the asexual reproductive stage, and the medusa stage is a sexually reproductive stage, depending on the species and depending on which group of cnidarians it's part of. And so again, here we can see some of the other classic cnidarian characteristics, being that they have those two tissue layers. We have our outside layer, the ectoderm, and our endoderm. There's a middle layer in there. Forgive the pun, this isn't meant to be a pun, but there's a middle layer in there that's kind of jelly-like that we call the mesoglia. And then here's their one opening to their gastric system, their mouth, digest it, and then it forms basically acts like a butt a little bit later on, right? So mouth, butt, one opening right there. And then the medusa stage is basically, we flip that over and we get the polyp stage. Here are the tentacles sticking out, here's the mouth, digestive system, and then it goes back out. So here we're looking at a hydrozoa, for example, which is one of the really great examples of the switching between body plans. And that's what we mean with this term right here, polymorphic. So poly meaning many and morph meaning shape or form, right? So these cnidarians are going to switch between the two polyp and medusa stage throughout their lifetime. And so this is a hydrozoa. So we basically see two major polyp structures in this hydrozoa right here. We see the gastrozoids, like these ones, that are responsible for feeding, right? Hence the tentacles, okay? Because those tentacles are where the cnidocytes are. And so these are going to be the feeding ones, the feeding individuals. These are many individuals that are all living together in one colony. And then they all also share, kind of fun, they all share one gut, So the gastrozoids, they're the feeding polyps. And then the gonozoids, these are the reproductive polyps. And what we see in here, with those weird kind of button-looking like things those are medusa that are forming. So the gonozoid goes through mitosis to make these medusa. The medusa are going to swim away, kind of like little jellyfish-like things. And the medusas are the ones that are going to be going through sexual reproduction, producing gametes through meiosis. Okay, so we have asexual reproduction with these polyps dividing, all living together as one colony, and then the gonozoids produce the medusa, which are the sexual reproductive stage, which aren't pictured here in this image, but they float away, spread their gametes out, gametes fuse, the resulting larvae then settles down and grows into another polyp stage. So let's take a quick look at some of the major groups within Phylum Cnidaria. So class Anthozoa. So these are the things like corals and anemones, things like that. This group only has a polyp stage. Okay, so I know we just talked about how they're polymorphic, but the Anthozoas are going to be the exception to that. They only have their polyp stage. So the corals especially tend to live in colonies where each coral is made up of basically genetically identical individuals that grow and secrete an exoskeleton, which builds up the coral reef, right? And the exoskeleton is made of calcium carbonate. We also see in this group the anemones, like this one right here. So again, polyp stage, the cnidocytes would be at the tops of the tentacles right here that they can use to grab on and capture their prey. Okay. So they don't have a medusa stage. Their polyps make the gametes, and the way they do that, through meiosis, and then they just send their gametes out into the water and they float around and they have to find their opposite gamete, right? So sperm has to find egg kind of thing. So the Scyphozoa, these are considered the true jellies. Their name comes from an ancient Greek word, scyphos, which was a type of drinking cup. I guess if you turn it upside down, kind of the same shape as a cup. I don't know what the ancient Greeks are drinking out of. But that's where their name comes from. They also have two body plans. They have a long-lived polyp stage and then their more predatory medusa stage. The polyps tend to be relatively small. They tend to settle on the bottom of the ocean floor. And then the polyps will produce medusa, just like we saw before with the example of the life cycle with the Hydrozoa. Okay. So these are, again, they tend to kind of just drift. They use their bell to kind of push them. They're not super directional in their movement. They don't have eyes, so they're just, scooching around. They, again, their tentacles are often laced with some sort of toxin or venom that's injected through those cnidocytes that they have. Then they put their meal of fish or whatever they trap in their tentacles into their gastrovascular cavity and then digest it, and then it goes back out. Okay. So again, here's our medusa stage. Creates gametes. Those gametes fuse to create the next diploid stage, the zygote. The larva is going to settle into a polyp. The polyp just hangs out, does its thing. Eventually, either seasonally or certain temperatures or certain signals from the environment. I'm not totally sure what's going on here to trigger this, but it will bud and it will form the ephyra, which are basically, in a sense, larval medusa stages. Those ephyra will then transition into a medusa stage and the whole thing starts over again. So, and here's our Hydrozoa. These are, again, the polymorphs. These are the ones that we definitely see that true medusa and polyp stage in their lifetime. These are kind of the weird, unique ones in Cnidaria. These include things like Hydra, Portuguese man of war, some freshwater Cnidarians are in this group as well. A lot of them are marine too, but most of the freshwater Cnidarians that we see would be in Hydrozoa. They tend to either be alone or in colonies. You can do it either way. If they are in colonies, they will often share a gut, like we saw. They'll share that gastrovascular cavity. And yeah, these are kind of the unique individuals in Cnidaria, because they come in lots of different shapes. This Portuguese man of war confused scientists for a very, very, very long time. We weren't quite sure what this was. So we figured out, oh, hey, it's a Cnidarian. And then the Cubozoans. So these are also commonly called the box jellyfish. So these are unique in the sense that, one, they have incredibly, incredibly potent venom. Like, you could die if you get stung by one of these. Not always, but it's not always fatal. But, don't go trying getting stung by a box jelly. And two, they have some very rudimentary eyes. So they have kind of two sets of light-sensing eyes. And so they have a pair of light-sensing organs, and there's 12 of these that surround their entire body. And this gives them basically directionality to the light. They can't see images, right? So like our eyes forms images. I can see the computer that's sitting in front of me, blah, blah, blah. They just basically tell light or dark with these eyes. And they have them, you know, around their cube of their body, and that gives them information as to is something moving around them potentially that's blocking the light, and then or is what direction is the light at. So this allows for a little bit more complex behaviors with these box jelly than we see in other cnidarians, because other cnidarians don't necessarily have this ability to detect light. Okay. So they can be very, very tiny in their tentacles. The nematocysts in their tentacles can still inject their venom, even if they are not attached to the cubozoan. So it's not uncommon for certain times of year, especially in areas where these are pretty regular visitors, like in parts of Australia, to kind of shut down the beaches in that area, or at least swimming at those beaches, because even if the box jellyfish isn't there, you could still have random tentacles floating by that could sting people. That's no good. We don't want any of that. Alright, so that wraps up, again, our cnidarians right here. The jellyfish, box jellyfish, hydrozoas, corals, anemones, things like that, known for being diploplastic, radially symmetrical, now only having one opening to their digestive system. The next location we're going in our phylogenetic tree are these bilateral organisms, so having one line of symmetry, right? So as we noticed, with these cnidarians, we don't see a brain, we don't see a head, right? So life's a little bit easier if you concentrate on your sensory organs, which we'll discover as we talk about the bilaterals.